If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Level Up Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and joining me once again, I have Josh. Josh, how are you doing today?
Oh, much better now. Just much better.
Yeah, we were going to record the other day, and then you sent me this cryptic text like, I am going to die. Can we record tomorrow?
I am here only by the will of necromancers. They have raised me from the dead. They have brought me back beyond the veil, inhabiting this mortal flesh, to come to you, dear listener, and tell you all about leveling up your gaming. No, I was not feeling good. I don't know what's going on.
No,
I'm better. Better.
You generally with you, I can just blame it on the weather. That's how it works.
Oh yes, my allergies do kick my butt.
You could also tell that Josh has a new microphone. So if you have any qualms about the microphone, let us know. levelupgamingpodcast@gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupgaming. We'll be happy to take your comments, concerns about Josh's microphone. But you did try to segue us with your necromancer comments into our topic.
I mean, we could also segue with my bad allergies because, it's almost as if there is some magical force out in the ether that is attacking me, an unseen, unknown entity.
Exactly. So we're going to be talking about, I guess, is this a genre episode about a fantasy game? Okay. I wanted to make sure I understood the assignment here as we go forward. So yeah, we're going to talk about running a fantasy game.
Yeah, I thought I really enjoyed talking about sci-fi, and a lot of what we were talking about with sci-fi was, like space fantasy. And I wanted to talk about the differences between like low and high fantasy. Because I hear this a bunch when I'm talking with people. They, oh man, get some low fantasy. That sounds really fun. What is low fantasy? Do you know what low fantasy is?
Yes. So low fantasy is the fantasy genre without magic, effectively. You've got less magical. Well, you have less magical and less mystical creatures in it. It's more grounded in reality. It'd be more like medieval times.
If medieval times had one wizard that might show up.
Yes, magic is very rare in a low fantasy setting. And it's not even like 100% concrete that might actually exist. It's just that there's somebody who does some pretty hinky stuff. Okay. Yeah. A good example of that, and I know we're going to talk about that later, but like the Game of Thrones books, the Song of Fire and Ice, they start as low fantasy. They move more into high fantasy as they go along, but they start definitively low fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that if you want to tell a story, like fantasy is a fantastic place to be, because fantasy really just it's got everything. And if you've got the option for magic, then like literally anything you can tell you can do with magic. That's why a lot of our let's make it one shots just have that, because you can go kind of wacky with it. You can have some real fun with it. It can be political, it can be intriguing, it can be murder, it can be whatever, right? But I think that low fantasy is a fun little sub part of fantasy where you strip out like the commonality of magic, the commonality of monsters, and it's almost as if those things are intruding on the real world. Right. So that works really well in a tabletop setting, because you've got people, I don't know about you or me, but like a lot of the players out there, they don't experience real magic in their day-to-day lives. not like us.
Yeah.
So
Clearly.
getting that just like little taste of it every now and then is it's really fun and intriguing.
There's an inherent danger in a low fantasy world that doesn't necessarily always exist in a high fantasy world. Because if you do encounter something magical or a mystical beast of some sort, it's a pretty big deal. Like
Yeah.
it's very very scary. It's like, how are we going to defeat this thing?
Well, and also with a lot of like your standard high fantasy stuff, um, it's chock full of magic for healing and resurrection and protection and whatnot. And everybody, not everybody, but pretty much any party that's going out has got some sort of magic user in it that's going to be able to supply them with safety, security. And in a low fantasy world, you could get a cut and it could get infected and you could die. And
Yes.
there's not magic out there, or if there is magic out there, it comes with severe consequences. So like, yeah, it's a lot grittier, it's a lot darker. I'm not as up to date on the whole Critical Role thing as I had been. It just takes too long to watch. But if I remember correctly, they've done a whole thing where they've killed off a bunch of their gods, and so they don't have access to healing spells and a lot of that cleric stuff, which is it's still high fantasy, but like it's bringing it closer to that gritty realism where
They're
people
more in
actually have to
mid
watch out.
fantasy land. They're kind of
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but okay. So if low fantasy is more realistic with magic creeping in around the edges, I've got it listed as hedge mages and mud. Um, what would you say high fantasy? What defines high fantasy then?
well, there's where all your magic and your wizard. I mean, like D&D 5e is quintessential high fantasy. I
Yeah,
mean, like everybody has magic. There's every class has magic. You want to be a mage? You can be a mage, and you can be a mage. It's like the Oprah of high fantasy.
I mean, is there a problem with that? That sounds great. You
No,
just have to be attacked.
and then there you've got more mystical creatures. You got dragons. Obviously, you have all sorts of fantastical creatures that exist within it. You have things that can't be. You live in a world of magic. Okay, so they you can describe uh from Chrono Trigger, like the city Zeal, where everybody lives in the floating city. It's propelled by magic, and they have like superior things like that. Like you can have the fantastical in this world. Like that is high fantasy.
Yeah, I'm trying to look up. I had a quote that popped in my head, uh, talking about the two genres of fantasy are essentially uh, we used to have dragons and they had magic, and we'd like to have the dragons back. And the other one is we have too many dragons. We need to get rid of these dragons. They're destroying everything. And that's your low fantasy, and then your high fantasy.
But well
But
said.
yeah, magic is known by everybody. It's everywhere. Monsters are real. Whereas in low fantasy, you can still have monsters, you can still have magic, but it should really be, whispers. Or when it shows up, it's terrifying
Yeah.
and it's strange and weird. And I think those are real fun things to play with when you're telling a story. Um, I do have some examples. High fantasy, obviously Dungeons and Dragons. You already said it.
Yes.
Um, I like Lord of the Rings
Yes. Lord of the Rings is high fantasy.
because you've got your elves, you've got your orcs, you've got your wizards, you've got a Dark Lord that died. He's thousands of years old. He's come back. He's got a magical ring. Everything is magic. It's fun. Um, I also put in here Star Wars movies.
Well, we talked about sci-fi and that being more of a space fantasy. And so,
It is,
yes.
but it's a high fantasy because you've got Jedi's running around. They're space wizards. And in the movies, everybody knows about the space wizards. And the space wizards are all over the place doing space wizard stuff. Right?
Yes.
The flip of that would be the example of low fantasy where I put Andor.
Andor is in
the
Andor, so I'll take your word for it.
Andor is in this Star Wars universe, but it's just people living their lives. There's no Jedi. There's no.
Well, again,
magic.
a lot of Star Wars things have that dichotomy where you've got, if you go and watch, I'm blanking on a bunch of them, but there's a bunch of any story that doesn't involve the Jedi effectively is a low fantasy sort of setting.
Yeah, and well,
you can actually call them sci-fi in a way, like they're not really, even in the fantasy genre. That's why it sort of splits, the genre.
Which is one of the things that I'd like to talk about here is that you can have a high fantasy world and still tell a low fantasy story for the people that are the have-nots.
Yes. Yeah. No. Again, if you have ever played the Star Wars game, if you don't play Jedi in the game, everything is more of a they're grounded humanoid based characters. Like that is a very different story than when you incorporate the Jedi into the game. It just is.
Yeah. Well, and I mean that's the difference is like if you've got magic, if magic is readily available, then it becomes high fantasy. If magic is scarce or something that's whispered about in the back of bars and people call those that claim to know magic crackpots, well that's your low fantasy. It's fun stuff. Dresden Files does a bit of this where in the first so many books, every time he claims to be a wizard, everybody calls him you're making it up. But by this point, like the whole city's on fire and wizards are flinging magic all over the place and there's dragons overhead and vampires are ruling parts of the city. So like you can end up taking a low fantasy story and moving it into the realm of high fantasy by the pure power of scale creep. So that's fun too.
Yes.
I think I'd like to talk about the types of stories that really, really work best in the fantasy setting.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I think that there's what I've learned from when we do our Let's Make a One Shots is that generally any story can fit into any genre type. It takes some tweaking depending on what you end up doing, but the two you have listed here do fit really great into the fantasy stuff because you think, Lord of the Rings, you think most typical Dungeons and Dragons stories, A Song of Fire and Ice, like these are things that you have, they're big epic stories. Like that's, I think most people think when they play a tabletop role playing game, they think of telling a story that's like this, something that's going to scale into this epic proportion.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably where a lot of GMs, crap themselves, but it is true that these settings tend to lend themselves for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like the Final Fantasy. It's you start out, bopping rats in a sewer, and by the end of it, you're killing God. And this is really the genre that exemplifies that the best because when you have magic, when magic exists in the world, if it's, a low fantasy setting and it's just whispered about, that means there's bad stuff out there and you got to work at it. if it's high fantasy and magic exists and you can take a hold of it, you can really shape the cosmos. So that leads to these big epic stories. These are tales of heroes. This is the classic hero's journey. This is your, let's go save the world. Let's right all the wrongs. Let's uh, take out the bad guys, save all the puppies, whatever it is. It's what makes fantasy the best, because fantasy really is just that. It's that thing that you want. And the fantasy genre is like, well, you can have it. You can get it.
Yes.
And that's why I think these stories work the best in it. It showcases what they can do. Yeah, you can tell short stories, you can tell like little morality tales or murder mysteries or any of this other fun stuff. But what makes fantasy really shine is the big hero epic.
Yeah, no, again, that is the tale that you want to tell, is that, your rags to riches band, or your nobodies to somebody's group. It, even when you do a modern game, you sort of talk about like the hero's tale, like, you're trying to sort of replicate that for the group. You think about any game that lasts and spans an epic proportion of time. Like if your game is run for a year, you fit into this. You've made contacts with NPCs. There are memorable moments. There are all sorts of things that kind of go along with this, and there are things about the fantastical world that you've told, and like the complexity of your villain that sort of resonate in this world. And again, fantasy shines for this genre, being that because magic could be everywhere, or maybe it's not everywhere. Maybe you're on the cusp of it, or it's being birthed, like in the Song of Fire and Ice. Like it's that's sort of like there's big tales to tell. There's betrayals everywhere. There's not a modern sense of like the word in terms of like how to investigate things. There aren't cameras everywhere. People have to see things, or or identify things, or you have to use the spell of eternal truths on somebody, and interrogate them, and who knows what, and it's just like all sorts of great things. And it's just like there's a big you got a big march to that necromantic city, and you're gonna go fight the necromancer or something.
Yeah. And I think like when you're telling these stories, um, obviously you need to set the scene. You need to present it to your players, and the way that we talk about it, the way that we're going to start this big epic, this big hero's journey, is all in that visual, right? In those descriptive words, and in that opening cinematography, cinematographic, cinnamon sugared spice. Cinnamon rolls.
Toast Crunch.
That's what it is. In that cinnamon toast crunch, if kids can see, the difference between high fantasy and low fantasy is never more apparent in how you're going to start these stories, right? Yep. High fantasy is going to be crazy visuals. You got floating cities, weird species of different peoples, magic running rampant, crystalline structures floating through the sky, dragons flying around, whatever it is, right? But low fantasy is going to be your mud, your stone, your like down to earth people just trying to survive.
All high fantasy has tinges of low fantasy. You think about like the tavern or like the countryside village that you're in, that is a low fantasy place. Magic, although it exists within the world, is basically not present there. You are the source of magic when you arrive. Okay, and you're almost like the Witcher in that case. You're there to dispatch something. People are going to pay you coin for it. So it's very much like that. That sort of situation. And low fantasy is that tavern village, except for you're adventurers who come through there are going to solve very different problems when they come through.
Yeah. And if you step out of that muddy, dingy, soot-filled tavern and hop on a magic carpet, fly off into the sky to go shoot lasers at, space angels, then yeah, you're in a high fantasy. It's really that access to magic that really twists it off. The way that you start your story can set this scene. You can start it in a low fantasy and then build to high fantasy, but understand that you're going to be doing that. If you want to give hey, this is going to be high fantasy, and then pull it back, then I would give that initial, crazy fantasy description first. But we find our heroes, sitting in the mud and pull it back.
Yes.
So, who populates these worlds?
If you're telling a high fantasy world, you better darn well have some wizards. Okay, I'm just gonna say it right now. you got wizards. You might as well not be telling a high fantasy story.
Wizards coming out of every orifice. They're just wizards galore. Yeah. I love like all of the good high fantasy stories. Your bad guys. Like, how many bad guys in a fantasy story have you told that were like an evil wizard or a necromancer or like, somebody that's using magic to do something evil?
A lot of stories I've done that way. Again, if you've listened to this podcast enough, we talk about the evil necromancer, the Dark Lord, or something. Those tend to be a corrupted wizard. Okay, somebody who has magic, who can, because magic represents potentially enormous power
and choice
in a fantasy world.
Power and choice,
yes.
And that's the power and choice that your players are going to be presented with, and it's a morality issue. It's do you use your unlimited power to strike dominion over others, or do you use it to protect those weaker than you? And that's the tale of heroes. That's your big epic. And what better foil versus your incorruptible, holier than thou heroes, because we all know that nobody at your table is ever going to be evil or do war crimes, is definitely to show them against these terrible, terrible evil wizards or dragons. Also, you could do dragons. Dragons are the same exact thing.
Yes.
I mean, I like dragons that disguise themselves as politicians. Like they're fully magical beings that can do anything, but they hide themselves, and they're like,
when you had this written down here, I was gonna wait to see how you can describe it. I was gonna be like you got some big old dragons sitting in like the court halls, just also wearing like a vest. Like nobody's saying boo about it.
Would you? If a dragon is sitting in your courtroom wearing a vest, you're just gonna be like, don't look at him. Just don't look at him.
Just pretend that's not here.
Yeah. So any of your big magical beasties. I've got vampire lords in here also. Vampires are fantastic.
Yes.
For high fantasy. Liches, undead. They're just wizards that deal with death. Weird beings from other dimensions. Those are your beholders and your beyonders or whatever they are.
Uh-huh.
Right, your demon lords. Those are all fantastic for high fantasy. One thing I really love about high fantasy, it doesn't have to be all about the bad guys. It doesn't have to be all about whatever. if you have a commonality of monsters and magic and all that stuff, you should absolutely have nice monsters in your game.
Of course, no. Any world in which monsters exist, if all your monsters are bad, your players will just immediately kill all monsters. You have
Yeah.
to have good monsters.
Have some monsters out there that are like, I'm sorry, I was trying to read my book. I wasn't paying attention. Did you need something? Be like, it's absolutely imperative to show that to your players. We're talking about the power and choice of unlimited power. With wizards, monsters are the same thing, right? You have to give your players, show them that there is an option for good,
Yes.
and a good monster is a great way to start. What about low fantasy? You got any ideas for low fantasy
Yeah,
characters?
these all exist in high fantasy too. But you've got your the people of the court, your
Mm.
knights, your squires, your kings, your dukes. You have your ruffians, your thieves, your brigands. You've got your smugglers.
Ooh, love a good smuggler. The plain working folk. Just your bakers, your craftsmen, your carpenters, people doing jobs, farmers. Oh my God, so many farmers. Um, Anybody working for the church,
Oh
clergy,
yes, the
clergy,
church.
clergy,
Yep. Yes.
and various churches, because it's one of those things like, hey, we don't know if there's gods, but we're going to worship them, sort of thing. That's low fantasy. In high fantasy,
You tend to be more analogous. You have the one big church, and then you have like a bunch of older churches that okay, we're trying to bring them into the fold, and or appease to them, blah blah blah.
yeah, like the Church of the Nine Gods or whatnot. Um, and in high fantasy, it's less of a we're going to worship him just in case, and it's more of a we're going to worship him because he came by the other day and was really pissed. Um, so that's a difference there too. Uh, in low fantasy, you're going to have, if you've got a world where magic is creeping in along the edges, you're going to have one or two of those characters that has magic that's creeping in along the edges. You've got your lone druid, or you've got like a hedge wizard, or an old witch that people just say she makes potions and stuff like that, which is just her, healing the town, but she can see beyond the veil. Just people that have like a touch of magic that could be explained as something else, but it's there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that makes low fantasy just shine. There is magic in the world, but it's rare and it's dangerous.
Yes. Yes, that's where you get to the idea of like the one beast. Like you could say there's a werewolf like menacing the town. What does that look like in a low fantasy setting? And that's extremely dangerous in a low fantasy setting. Okay, like anything that could potentially have some magic or be of the supernatural is very, very dangerous in a low
Hmm.
fantasy setting. There's just a higher level of like mortal danger in a low fantasy world.
Yeah. And you've got the one girl in town who has fits and her eyes roll back and she says weird things, and they're trying to keep her away from the town because, like, oh, they're embarrassed by her. But what she says, you know, prophecies. And
Yeah.
so, it's that it's keeping magic just slightly outside of the norm. What about your players? Do you have any restrictions for your players in high fantasy?
I wouldn't have any restrictions at high or low fantasy necessarily. Obviously, you're limiting magic from one or the other. So like I probably wouldn't let any one player start with magic. in a low fantasy setting versus a high fantasy setting where you could just pay whatever you want to play that's going to work for the story. I'm not gonna. I mean, I don't know the story I'm going to tell yet, but I might have some parameters about the types of like personalities or characters I might want. But generally speaking, I probably wouldn't limit too much.
Yeah, I agree. It's anything that'll actually work in your story. Like knowing what the world is going to be, knowing the level of magic and access it's going to have. If it's high fantasy, go for it, right? If it's low fantasy, magic is going to be restricted at low levels, and we'll see what happens depending on how the story progresses. But I like, just people trying to make their way through the world, trying to make it better, trying to make it worse. Just enough bad luck to make it interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That brings us to the last part. What are some good tabletop game systems for high fantasy?
I mean, again, the quintessential one.
Not Dungeons and Dragons. You can't say that one. We've already said that multiple times.
Okay, well, that is the one.
That is the one. That's the one. Like that's the one that's like defined the whole tabletop system for fantasy.
Yes,
it has been for longer than I've been alive.
You got Pathfinder down here, which makes sense. The offshoots of Dungeons and
Dragons. Yeah, well, and even the low fantasy ones are offshoots of the 5e system, or the D20 system, or with high fantasy. High fantasy is the genre that made TTRPGs really stand up.
Yeah.
You have some of the Star Wars, you've got some of the war games and stuff like that, but even like Warhammer 40K, okay, that's kind of a high fantasy.
We talked about that in the last episode when we were talking about sci-fi, and you're like, well, sometimes it's a space fantasy.
Yeah, sometimes it is. Right? But other times it's like you've got a bunch of kind of wizards, and you've got creatures from the beyond, and there's an undead king. That's kind of high fantasy.
Generally speaking, if you are going to start a fantasy game, you don't know if you want it to be high fantasy or low fantasy. You can start low. You can work yourself into high fantasy or a more high fantasy based on where you start at the low fantasy.
Can't really work the other way, though.
You can't really work the other way. It'd be a very interesting game conceptually to say that you start as a wizard and magic is leaving the world. Okay? Like
that would be a very fun story.
That'd be a very fun story. You have to be very practiced and thought out as to how you go, and you'd have to tell people that's the premise: is that magic is dying in the world, so that they understand that.
Like you've got your wizard character, and you're like, you only have this many spell slots to the end of the game.
Yeah, so like it becomes more of it's a very different story that you're telling. You have things, but you don't have unlimited things. It's so again, you could tell it the other way, but I think that'd probably be the only way to kind of do the other version of the story. I don't know. Yeah, you figure it out. Some people are smarter than me and could probably figure it out. But that'd be one way that I think you could go the other way.
Yeah, which is like when we're talking about good systems that support low fantasy. Any of the high fantasy systems will work. You just have to homebrew some rules for it.
Yep.
The gods have died. We don't have magic anymore. Or none of you have been trained in magic, and the wizards are somewhere else. You now have to gather your people up and travel across the land to be taught by the Aes Sedai. No, wait, that's Wheel of Time. But there are some low fantasy systems. There's one called Low Fantasy Gaming, which is a 5e inspired OSR that's very restrictive of Magic. There's a free rules PDF out there. It is just exactly what you think. It's a D&D ripoff that doesn't have magic or has very little magic. There's Ironsworn. Ironsworn also has the digital version being free. What's fun about that one is that it's very much like a board and sword, but it also is designed so you can solo play.
Okay.
I do not have the patience with myself to solo play. But I'd like to hear somebody that does.
Okay.
I think that'd be interesting. But yeah, you can for a low system, you can homebrew rules, or you can just tell a story in a high fantasy world that is a low fantasy story. Like I said, Star Wars does it. You can do it too. You can figure it out. I've seen Star Wars movies. I'm betting most of you are better writers than that.
But yeah, so yes, you can make your own. You can make anything work that you want. I mean, again, if you become proficient in a system, you can just remove the magic from it, and it works just fine.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot going on in the fantasy genre. And it really
there's
is
so much
best.
going on that is generally where we tell our let's make a one shots, because I think they are probably the most ubiquitous and relatable to everybody who plays tabletop RPGs. If you've ever played tabletop RPGs, at some point I suspect that you've played some form of high fantasy with Dungeons and Dragons or something similar like that. I would find it very odd if nobody's played anything of the sort.
Unless you're like a big sci-fi nerd and you do nothing but play, Star Wars games or Star Trek games.
Yes,
but I mean, there's
I'm sure there are people. Okay, if you're there, let us know. Level Up Gaming Podcast at gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupgaming. But I'm pretty sure that most people, even those people, have played at least one game or some one time through Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, fantasy is it's the genre for tabletop games.
Yes. Do you have anything else you want to add to this one, Josh?
I really would like to, but I think we've pretty much covered it here.
Yeah. No, I agree with all that. So if you have thoughts on the fantasy genre, let us know. Level Up Your Gaming Podcast at gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. Also, the podcast is on YouTube if that's your listening medium, so you can smash the like button there, subscribe there. Otherwise, the podcast is on all your favorite podcasting sites. So review it, recommend it to a friend, all those good things. And that'll wrap us up for the week. So for Josh, I'm Aaron. Have a good week, everyone.
Bye.